Chapter 5. Isabella's loft apartment was an exercise in industrial minimalism. Exposed brick walls, concrete floors, softened by sparse area rugs, and large factory windows that offered a view of Atlanta's skyline. Tonight, streams of rainwater chasing down the glass blurred the view. Occasional flashes of lightning transformed the cityscape into a stark black and white photograph for a fraction of a second. The storm that had threatened during the gala had arrived with a vengeance, lashing the city with sheets of rain driven by gusts that occasionally rattled the old windows in their frames. The digital clock on her nightstand read 3:17 a.m., its red numerals casting a faint glow that was the only illumination besides her laptop and the sporadic lightning. Sleep remained elusive. Instead, Isabella sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by printouts, handwritten notes, and her laptop's glow. She'd pulled her hair back in a messy bun, loose strands falling around her face, and she absently tucked one behind her ear as she stared at the screen before her. Her face was scrubbed clean of the makeup she'd worn earlier. The subtle scent of her lemon sage face wash lingered on her skin. A clean, practical fragrance that was the antithesis of the perfumed opulence of the ballroom she'd left hours ago. Her midnight blue gown hung on the back of her closet door, a glamorous anomaly in a practical suits and workout clothes wardrobe. The silver stilettos lay where she'd kicked them off in frustration, one upright, one on its side like a fallen soldier. Only Mikhail's jacket remained within reach, draped over the chair beside her bed, where she'd absent-mindedly placed it after discovering it was still in her possession. Occasionally, her eyes drifted to it, distracted by its presence. An intimate object from a stranger, carrying his scent and warmth into her private space. Even in her loft, that woodsy primal scent reached her, incongruous against the backdrop of her practical space with its clean lines and absence of frills. The case file for the Claw Killer, as office staff had annoyingly dubbed the murderer, was spread across her duvet. Crime scene photos carefully arranged next to public records searches on Mikhail Volkov. Each photo was a gruesome testament to violence. The victims' throats torn with such force that the wounds gaped obscenely. The clinical glare of the forensic photographer's flash highlighted the distinctive three-claw pattern, parallel lacerations that no human weapon could easily replicate. She'd developed this habit in law school. Physical materials laid out to create a visual map of connections her logical mind might otherwise miss. What she found, or rather what she didn't find, bothered her more than the gruesome images of the victims' torn throats. "This doesn't make any sense," she muttered, scrolling through another database search that yielded minimal results. She rubbed her eyes, fighting the fatigue that blurred the screen before her. Mikhail Volkov first made a splash in Atlanta's social scene approximately 15 years ago. He had bought his first property and rapidly expanded his holdings into a real estate empire encompassing some of the city's most valuable areas. But before that, nothing. She could not locate his education records, previous address, or birth certificate. It was as though he'd materialized fully formed around age 20, with the resources and savvy of someone decades older. People didn't just appear out of nowhere with millions to invest. Even the ultra-wealthy left paper trails. College records, previous businesses, family connections. Isabella had prosecuted enough financial criminals to know that money always left tracks, except when deliberately, meticulously concealed. Another lightning flash illuminated the room, so bright it momentarily bleached the colors of her surroundings. It was followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that vibrated through the building's old bones. The storm was now directly overhead, mirroring Isabella's thoughts' tumult. Rain lashed against the windows with renewed fury, driven by gusts that made eerie whistling sounds as they found the small gaps in the industrial building's weatherproofing. She hugged her knees to her chest. A rare moment of physical vulnerability she allowed herself only in private. The storm made her loft feel exposed and isolated. Glass and steel suspended in darkness, surrounded by elements she couldn't control. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with Damon's name and a photo of him making a ridiculous face. His contact picture specifically chosen to make her smile during stressful cases. She answered immediately, grateful for the interruption of her increasingly circular thoughts. "It's past 3, Damon. You should be asleep." Despite the admonition, relief colored her tone, connection with someone firmly anchored in her rational, orderly world. The background noise from the phone suggested he was dealing with the same storm, though he was experiencing it differently. "So should you," he countered, sounding far too alert for the hour. The background noise suggested he was in a car. The rhythmic swish of wipers fighting against the downpour and the steady drumming of rain on a metal roof. "But we both know you're surrounded by case files right now." Isabella felt a flash of annoyance at being so predictable. After 3 years of working together, Damon knew her habits too well. Her inability to transition directly to relaxation. "I just wanted to get my thoughts down while they were still fresh." "You were right about Volkov." The background noise shifted as Damon presumably parked his car, the engine cutting out to leave only the sound of heavy rain on the roof. His voice took on the focused quality it carried when delivering significant findings. "I did some digging after the gala, called in a few favors from a buddy at the records department." Isabella reached for her notepad, flipping to a fresh page. The paper was creamy and expensive, one of her few indulgences. Her pen poised above paper, ready to capture details in neat, precise handwriting. Professional habits were hard to break, even at 2 a.m. "And it's weird, Isabella. Weird. Volkov's paper trail starts 15 years ago with the purchase of his first building. Before that, ghost town. No immigration records, previous real estate transactions, or even a credit history." The excitement in Damon's voice was palpable. He loved puzzles almost as much as she did, though his enthusiasm tended toward the conspiratorial, while hers remained methodical. His words tumbled over each other in his eagerness to share his findings, his breath quickening with the thrill of discovery. "That matches what I'm finding," Isabella confirmed, tapping her pen against her notepad. The soft tap, tap, tap created a counterpoint rhythm to the rain's steady drumbeat. People don't just appear out of thin air with investment capital. "That's not even the strangest part," Damon continued, his voice dropping as if he were afraid of being overheard despite being alone. The dramatic shift in volume made Isabella roll her eyes affectionately. His flair for theatrics was both endearing and occasionally exhausting. Paper rustled on the other end of the line, suggesting he was consulting notes. "I found photos of him going back 15 years. Galas, ribbon cuttings, charity events. And Isabella? He hasn't aged. Not a day, not a wrinkle, not a grey hair. The Mikhail Volkov in a 2010 Atlanta Business Chronicle photo looks identical to the man we saw tonight. A chill ran down Isabella's spine that had nothing to do with the storm outside. The hairs on her arms stood up. That's impossible. Even as she said it, she recalled the oddly ageless quality of Volkov's features. The perfect skin that seemed to lack the standard textures of human epidermis. I thought so too. Plastic surgery, good genes. I don't know, but it's freaky. The sound of papers shuffling came through the line. Damon was as old-fashioned as she was about printing essential documents. Lightning flashed outside her window, briefly illuminating the room in harsh white light. The light cast everything in stark relief, banishing shadows for a split second. At that moment, Isabella's gaze fell on Mikhail's jacket, draped across the chair beside her bed. The garment seemed to absorb the momentary illumination rather than reflect it, remaining a pool of darkness even in the flash. An impossible thought crossed her mind. One that rational, evidence-driven DA Isabella Santos should have dismissed immediately. Her stomach tightened with a mixture of intellectual rebellion and inexplicable certainty. But Mia's testimony kept replaying in her head. His eyes glowed red, like animal eyes catch headlights, but redder, angrier. He moved so fast, like a blur, and when he attacked that man, he was changing. Not all human anymore. The young, homeless girl had been so sure, so specific in her description. Isabella had seen the terror in her eyes and heard the tremor in her voice as she recounted what she'd witnessed. Isabella had attributed it to trauma, to the darkness playing tricks, to the mind's tendency to distort frightening experiences. But what if... Damon, I need you to research something else. She hesitated, aware of how it would sound, how completely it would contradict her reputation as the most rational prosecutor in the DA's office. Folklore, legends, specifically anything related to creatures that don't age normally. Immortals, vampires, anything with red eyes. The line was silent for a moment, the only sound the steady drumming of rain. When Damon spoke again, his voice held uncharacteristic concern rather than his usual playful mockery. Isabella, you're not seriously... Just do it, she interrupted, rubbing her temples where a headache began forming. The pressure of her fingertips against her skin provided momentary relief from the throbbing that had started behind her eyes. Her rational mind was already constructing defenses against her suggestion. Exhaustion, stress, the power of suggestion from an emotional witness. We're missing something obvious, and I can't shake the feeling that our witness was telling the truth about what she saw. If we rule out the impossible, then whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth, Damon finished, quoting Sherlock Holmes. His voice softened, concern evident beneath the literary reference. The rain on his end seemed to have lessened somewhat, no longer drowning out his words. Okay, I'll see what I can find. But Isabella? Maybe you should get some sleep. Even you need rest sometimes. I will, she lied, knowing there was no chance of sleep with her mind racing like this. The Isabel Santos who walked into courtrooms and faced down hardened criminals would never entertain supernatural explanations. But at 3 a.m., alone with the storm raging outside, that certainty felt less absolute. Text me anything you find. And Damon, stay dry out there. Too late for that, he said with a weak laugh. Half drowned already. Night, boss. Lightning flashed again, and thunder rolled almost immediately after, suggesting the storm was directly overhead. The sharp crack seemed to split the air, tension releasing in an explosive burst of sound. The power flickered momentarily, the laptop screen dimming before stabilizing again. In the blue glow of her laptop screen, Isabella glanced again at Mikhail's jacket. It looked impossibly expensive, even draped casually over her IKEA chair. The tailoring was exquisite, hand-stitching visible along the seams, and the fabric was so fine that it seemed to shimmer slightly with each flash of lightning. The incongruity in her practical, sparse apartment was jarring, like evidence of another world intruding upon hers. Acting impulsively, she reached for it, running her fingers over the fine material. The fabric was unlike anything she'd ever touched, softer than regular wool, with a weight that suggested quality beyond her experience. That evergreen scent rose to meet her as she handled the garment, stronger now that she was closer, filling her nostrils with forest and earth and something wilder beneath. Something crinkled in the inner pocket. She hesitated a moment before slipping her hand inside, extracting a small piece of paper folded precisely in half. The pocket lining was silk, cool and smooth against her fingers as she retrieved the note. Opening it, she found a handwritten note in elegant script that looked like it belonged on a historical document rather than a modern communication. "The jacket suits you, keep it. I suspect you'll be out after dark more often than is wise. When you're ready, call me. I'll answer your questions, but you may not like the answers. M." He'd written a phone number beneath the note. Isabella stared at it, her thoughts a chaotic jumble of rational objections and impossible suspicions. The heavy cream paper felt expensive between her fingers, substantial in a way modern stationery rarely was. How had he known she would find this? Had he planned their entire interaction on the terrace, right down to her keeping his jacket? The implications were unsettling. Either he was several steps ahead of her investigation, or he possessed an intuition that bordered on the preternatural. Her fingers traced the elegant script, the pen's pressure leaving slight indentations in the expensive paper. She could feel the deliberate strokes, the controlled force behind each letter. The handwriting itself was revealing, formal, precise, with flourishes that suggested education from another era. Not the utilitarian script of the digital age, but something learned through rigorous repetition when penmanship was considered an art form. She reached for her phone, saved the unknown number from the text message as informant, and then, after a moment's hesitation, programmed Mikhail's number from his note under simply M. She wouldn't call him yet, not until she understood what she was dealing with. But having the number gave her a sense of control, a connection to the mystery she was determined to solve. But as she finally cleared the files from her bed and laid down to attempt sleep, Isabella couldn't shake the image of Mikhail's eyes in the moonlight, dark and fathomless, watching her with an intensity that seemed to see past her carefully constructed professional facade, straight through to the woman beneath. A woman who, despite her dedication to justice and rationality, was beginning to wonder if there were things in this world beyond her understanding. Isabella's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor of the chief prosecutor's office, each step echoing like a metronome counting down to confrontation. The summons had come via Damon, not even the courtesy of a direct call, and the timing couldn't have been worse. She was expecting a call on the preliminary blood work from the latest victim. The receptionist, Elaine, glanced up with a sympathetic smile, the fluorescent light reflecting off her wire-rimmed glasses. "He's waiting for you," she said, nodding toward the imposing double doors at the end of the corridor. The brass nameplate gleamed in the fluorescent lighting. Everett Rogers, District Attorney. Isabella paused to straighten her blazer, a reflexive gesture that had less to do with appearance and more to do with armor. She'd learned the habit from Rogers when he'd been her mentor rather than her adversary. The irony wasn't lost on her. She knocked once, then entered without waiting for a response. Another habit she'd picked up from him. Rogers stood at the window overlooking downtown Atlanta, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the midday sun that streamed through the blinds in dusty golden bars. At 55, he still cut an imposing figure, though the last few years had added silver to his temples and a slight paunch to his once athletic frame. Political ambition had a way of weighing on a person, especially when it required moral compromises. "Isabella," he said without turning, "close the door." She did so, the soft click of the latch, like a period at the end of a sentence. The office smelled of leather, coffee, and the faint citrus of his cologne, familiar scents that once represented trusted guidance. The leather chairs gleamed dark and imposing in the filtered sunlight, and the heavy curtains framing the windows muffled the distant sounds of traffic below. "You wanted to see me?" She kept her voice neutral and professional, though she already knew why she was here. The case files tucked under her arm felt suddenly heavier, the paper edges digging into her skin. Rogers finally turned, his expression a practiced blend of concern and authority. He'd perfected that look for press conferences, for juries, for subordinates who needed management. "Sit down." Isabella remained standing. Small acts of defiance were sometimes all you had. She felt the cool air from the vent above blow across her neck, raising goosebumps despite the day's warmth. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he masked it with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The skin around his mouth tightened, creating small lines. "Still stubborn as ever. That used to be one of your best qualities." "I thought it still was," she replied evenly. "What's this about, Everett?" "I have a witness interview in 40 minutes. He moved to his desk, a massive mahogany piece that dominated the room like a judge's bench. The afternoon light caught on his wedding ring as he picked up a folder. A copy of her case file. She realized with a jolt of anger that tasted metallic on her tongue. It likely included her electronic notes on Mikhail Volkov. "Mikhail Volkov," he said, tapping the folder against his palm with a rhythmic pat, pat, pat that grated on her nerves. "Care to explain why you're investigating one of Atlanta's most prominent citizens based on the testimony of a homeless teenager with possible mental health and drug issues?" Isabella felt heat rising in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral, though she could feel a muscle twitching near her jaw. "I'm pursuing all viable leads in a double homicide investigation. Volkov's name came up in witness testimony, and his connections to both victims warrant further investigation." "Connections?" Rogers laughed, the sound hollow in the wood-panelled office, bouncing off the law books that lined the shelves behind him like silent witnesses. "Because he gets coffee where one victim worked? Because he donates to the park where another was found? By that standard, half of Atlanta's elite should be suspects." "It's more than that," Isabella insisted, taking a step forward. The flooring beneath her feet changed from hardwood to plush Berber, absorbing the sound of her movement. The witness description was specific and detailed, and there are anomalies in the forensic evidence that... "That's what?" Rogers interrupted, his voice hardening. His chair squeaked as he shifted his weight. "Support some theory about supernatural involvement? I read your notes, Isabella. Glowing eyes? Inhuman movement? Non-human saliva samples?" He tossed the folder onto his desk, papers sliding partially out. "This isn't one of those cable TV shows. This is the Atlanta DA's office, and we deal in facts, not folklore." Isabella's jaw tightened. The pendant at her throat, her mother's, felt suddenly heavy against her skin. "The forensic anomalies are facts, Everett. The blood work shows..." "Contaminated samples," he cut in. "Lab error. There are a dozen rational explanations that don't involve turning one of our city's biggest donors into a monster from a horror movie." The air conditioning hummed in the silence that followed, cool air raising goosebumps on Isabella's arms. The vents rattled slightly with each cycle, providing a mechanical backbeat to their confrontation. She chose her following words carefully. "I'm not drawing conclusions yet. I'm gathering evidence. That's my job." Rogers sighed, his expression softening into something that might have passed for genuine concern if she didn't know him better. He rounded the desk and perched on the edge, reducing their physical distance. Another calculated move she recognized from their shared courtroom days. "Isabella," he said, his voice gentler now, "I know this case has hooks in you. The markings, the blood loss. I understand why it resonates." He paused, watching her face. The wall clock ticked loudly in the silence between his words. "It's not unlike your mother's case." The mention of her mother hit like a physical blow. Isabella felt her breath catch, the familiar tightness in her chest whenever Luisa Santos's murder entered the conversation. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, too harsh. Rogers knew precisely what he was doing, invoking her deepest wound. "This isn't about my mother," she said, the lie bitter on her tongue. "Isn't it?" Rogers pressed. "You've been working yourself to exhaustion. Damon says you've barely left the office. You're seeing connections that don't exist because you need them to exist." He leaned forward. "You're looking for patterns because you never found them in your mother's case." Isabella's fingers tightened around the files she held, knuckles whitening. The paper edges cut into her palms, a slight pain that anchored her to the moment. "That's not fair." "No, it's not," he agreed, surprising her. "It's not fair what happened to your mother. It's not fair that law enforcement never caught her killer. And it's unfair that these new cases trigger all that pain again." His voice took on the practiced sincerity he used in closing arguments, the cadence as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. "But what's unfair is letting that cloud your judgment to the point where you're targeting innocent people." "I'm not targeting anyone," Isabella countered, her composure fraying. She could hear the strain in her voice, feel the tension coiling in her shoulders. "I'm following evidence." "You're following ghosts," Rogers interrupted sharply. His hand slapped against the desk like a gunshot in the quiet room. "And in the process, you're about to accuse a man who donated the children's wing of Atlanta General, who funds half the city's homeless outreach programs, and who, incidentally, is a personal friend of Mayor Collier and 3 state Supreme Court justices." The implication hung between them, heavy and oppressive, like the humidity that sometimes seeped through the building's windows during Atlanta's summers. Politics. Always politics with Rogers these days. So, this is about protecting powerful friends, Isabella said flatly. Her tongue felt dry against the roof of her mouth. Not pursuing justice. Rogers's expression hardened, the lines around his mouth deepening. This is about not destroying the office's credibility on a witch hunt. Do you have any idea what damage you could do? Not just to your career, but to every case this office is currently prosecuting. He stood, closing the distance between them. She could smell the mint on his breath. I'm not asking you to drop the investigation. I'm telling you to redirect it. Focus on viable suspects. Follow the evidence where it leads, not where you want it to go. Isabella met his gaze steadily, feeling the warmth of his breath against her face. And if the evidence continues to point to Volkov? Then you bring me something concrete. Real evidence that would stand up in court. Not the ramblings of a street kid or your gut feeling about glowing eyes. Rogers shook his head, a few strands of silver hair falling across his forehead. Until then, stay away from Mikhail Volkov. Is that an order? Isabella asked, her voice quiet but steady. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, marking seconds in the tense silence. Consider it strong professional advice, Rogers replied. If you need it to be an order, I can make it one. I can also reassign you from the case entirely. There it was, the threat she'd been expecting since she entered the office. The air felt suddenly thicker, harder to breathe. You wouldn't dare, she said, though she knew he would. This is my case. I've been building it from the beginning. And I appreciate your dedication, Rogers said, his tone making it clear he didn't. But I'm responsible for this office's reputation and relationships. If you can't investigate objectively, I'll find someone who can. Isabella felt a cold anger settling in her chest. You mean someone who knows which suspects are off limits? Rogers didn't flinch. I mean someone who won't let personal history distort professional judgment. He picked up the case file from his desk and held it out to her, the papers rustling like dry leaves. We both know what your mother's case did to you, Isabella. Don't let it destroy everything you've worked for. She took the file, careful not to let their fingers touch. My mother's case made me who I am. It's why I fight for victims when everyone else has given up. It's also why you see killers in shadows, Rogers countered. He returned to his desk with an apparent dismissal. That will be all, A.D.A. Santos. The formal title stung more than it should have. Isabella turned to leave. She paused with her hand on the doorknob, feeling the cool brass against her palm. What if I'm right about him? She asked, not looking back. The doorframe was cool against her fingertips, the wood smooth from years of similar confrontations. She heard Rogers sigh. Then bring me evidence a judge would accept. Real evidence, Isabella. Not theories, not coincidences, and certainly not supernatural speculation. There was a rustling of papers as he picked up another file, the sound deliberate and dismissive. Until then, consider this conversation a warning. Isabella left without another word, closing the door with deliberate softness rather than the slam she would have preferred. The click of the latch echoed in the empty hallway. The corridor stretched before her, suddenly longer than it had been minutes before. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from Damon. Harper called. They found more blood evidence at the scene. Non-human proteins confirmed. Isabella tightened her grip on the case files. Rogers had made his position clear, but so had the evidence. If pursuing the truth meant risking her career, then that was a price she was willing to pay.